Through the chair, you're live on HCAM TV.
Thank you. Welcome to the November 9th meeting of the Zoning Advisory Committee of Hopkinton. We are awaiting several of our Zoning Advisory Committee members, and we cannot yet begin. Any of you participating by video, I've shared my screen and we'll be going through this outline just as a way to organize the meeting. Okay, we have Sundar. We have Ted. Hi, Ted. Hi, Sundar. Still waiting for Ria and John and Rachel.
Ria just joined.
Okay, excellent. Hi, Ria. That gives us how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
7.
7. Oh, we're up to 7, so that's good, right?
Yeah.
We can go. All right. I need to read that lovely meeting script. So bear with me. Okay. This open meeting of the Hopkinton Zoning Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of COVID-19. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we are complying with the executive order that suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The executive order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as the public body makes provisions through adequate alternative means to ensure interested members of the public are provided reasonable access to the deliberations of this meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting may feature public comment. For this meeting, the Zoning Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via Zoom. Let's see, and it will be broadcast by HCAM TV through one or many of its channels and platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. I think that's the extent of the required part. I also want to do a roll call of all members. So just say your name and then here or present or whatever you wish. So Ron.
Ron Foisey, present.
Madhu.
Madhumita Chandrasekhar, present.
Curtis. Curtis, you're on mute.
Curtis Smithson, present.
Great. Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, present.
John Coutinho?
And John Catino, I'm present also.
Ria?
Ria McNamara, present.
And let me see if I missed anything. Ted?
Ted Barker Hook, present.
Excellent. And I don't know if Rachel has been able to join us. Rachel, are you there?
Rachel Rawson, I'm here.
So Rachel has not had a chance to formally swear in, but she will be participating. There are no votes this evening, so she'll be participating, but not as a voting member tonight. Okay, great. So I have done a screen share of an outline for tonight's meeting, just to help organize our meeting today. So the entire topic tonight is the solar bylaw that is regarding the commercial ground-mounted solar. Has nothing to do with anything on roofs or residential solar, okay? So tonight, I'm just going to start out by reviewing our objectives for this bylaw, our timeline, and then I'm going to ask John to go through some maps he has managed to create and provide to us, and how they may help us in this process. He also has some updated advice from town council that we asked specific questions about the wording that we can get away with in a solar bylaw. And finally, I have an outline of topics that I've put together from the public forum and other discussions that we've had on the topic, so that we can organize this and go through each specific category of suggestions and decide on changes to the bylaw related to each one of those. So just to review, this is for commercial ground-mounted solar. The current jurisdiction is the planning board and the conservation committee when a proposed solar installation would be on a lot with wetlands. The current zoning bylaw for commercial solar, as well as the special permit application and the application process, and the wetlands preservation. I don't think I have the wording of that bylaw or state law correct, but nonetheless, those are our current laws and regulations that govern commercial ground-mounted solar. Based on all of our previous discussions and also the wording in the solar bylaw right now, our objectives for solar in Hopkinton and for changes governing our changes to this solar bylaw. One is we want to respect property owners' rights, those who wish to develop their land and those abutters or residents who wish to maintain the aesthetic and practical value of their property. So that encompasses a lot of different things like sight lines, noise, stormwater, etc. We wish to promote sustainable energy use. All of us feel that that is important, and solar is an excellent way to do so. We wish to promote protection of older growth trees and natural habitat. And we want to maintain the character of Hopkinton as a semi-rural, wooded, attractive landscape. In the past, we've been given legal advice, and this is, I'm referring to, in the past years, not in the past few months, but in past years, we've been given legal advice, not only to Zach, but directly to planning board and to other boards, that the wording of the current solar bylaw can't be substantially changed without the danger of coming up against the Massachusetts state law and their definition of unreasonably regulate solar. So that is essentially how we got to the point of having a solar overlay map last year. However, more recent information and the encouragement of a lot of the public in town has indicated that we should reconsider whether or not changes to the wording of the solar bylaw really could pass muster in terms of the state laws. So we asked town council for clarification on a number of different items, and that's how we're going forward. John, I am going to send it over to you. I'll stop screen sharing at this point, but why don't you go through what town council said and then go through some of the maps. Now, I just want to make a point that the maps that John is going to send to us, these are just to give all of the members of ZAC an idea of what we can get and what we can see, and help us visualize. But I don't want to get bogged down because maps are really cool, and and I don't want to get bogged down in just talking about maps tonight. Okay, so I just keep that in mind. I think that this is going to be an overview of those maps, and then we will go back to my outline, and then we'll come back to the maps as we need to. Okay. Okay, so John, you may take it away.
So would you like me to talk about town?
The legal counsel first.
So it's kind of simple, but not very easy what they've told me. The thing that the committee really needs to think about is if the changes that are proposed, if any, meet the test. And I know we've said this a couple times and we've talked about it, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with MGL Chapter 48, Section 3, but that's really kind of the main point of what town council is saying. Any changes, whether it be setbacks, percentage coverage, slopes, anything that would restrict solar different than what's currently there, needs to pass the test of whether that change protects the public health, safety, or welfare. And that's really it. That's what any court case is going to be decided on. That's what town council's advice is going to be based on, any type of change that's brought before them. So they said that's the first step and really kind of the only step that needs to be evaluated. So I just encourage the committee to think about that first and foremost. And if there's a change that you want to make to the bylaw, whether it's in the text or it's a overlay district, you need to ask the question, how does this change protect the health, public health, safety, or welfare of the residents? And it needs to have a strong defense for that. It can't necessarily be view sheds. That's something town council kind of described to me as that's a really tough one to argue. So that's kind of it. And town council said that they will look at any language that they would like to, we would like them to review, but until they see language ahead of them, they can't give any more specific guidance because it is really dependent on what is being proposed and in what context. So they said, this is really the first and main step that needs to be taken is giving, anything that's proposed needs to go against this test.
Okay.
Any questions on that?
Through the chair,
Please go ahead.
is there, again, this might come out as not serious, but what is the definition? How do we define public health, the terms public health, safety, and welfare? I mean, it seems fairly broad, and one could expand the meaning to maybe a ridiculous extent. I just want to find out if there are sort of reasonable bounds that we have to consider.
So that's something we talked about too. So I think public health and safety is, you can, reasonably assume what those mean, right? The welfare or the well-being is, it's tough because there really haven't been any court cases that have given precedent for that we can understand. So you can make a strong argument that the changes that are being proposed help the welfare because the welfare means this. And the only real way to say no is for a court to review that once it's challenged. Town council's not going to say that doesn't work. Or, unless it's obvious, right? They're not going to say, if your argument is pretty solid, they're not going to say that doesn't work. They're going to say, okay, well, we'll take that and defend it if it ever gets challenged. But until that point, they can't definitively say what a court is going to say constitutes welfare because it just hasn't happened. So it's an unsatisfying answer, but that's the conversation we had.
Mary, I have two questions for John.
Please go ahead.
John, the first was, I think I just misunderstood something you said at the end of your introduction. What I heard was, we can't just say U sheds. That just won't fly. I don't know what U sheds is. I got a feeling I misheard that.
Sorry, view sheds, VIEW sheds.
Okay.
So basically prohibiting solar in order to protect a view shed does not meet the test of public health, safety, or welfare.
All right, so like, it's not pretty is not a good reason to,
Correct.
right.
Ah.
My other question, John, is this, is that standard, those three things, is that for changing the existing bylaw, or will that also be applied to a potential commercial solar overlay?
Both. So that is the general test that the court system is going to use on any challenge to solar. Right now, the way that our bylaw is set up, there's not going to be any challenge to solar because, there's going to be very few, if any, challenges to solar. I shouldn't say none, because it's so permissible. But elsewhere, where it is a little bit more restricted, any challenge to what they've got in place is going to have to meet that test. So
And then
any changes we make are going to have to meet that test.
And then one more question for background. Did town council indicate any cases out there regarding commercial solar to give us guidance? What has been approved by the state, Commonwealth?
I didn't specifically ask for any, but they didn't tell me of any.
I just want to be clear through the chair. This is for future solar farms. This is not going to have anything to do with the solar farms that have already been approved under the current bylaw.
Correct.
Grandfathered. And we have four major ones right now in town. Is that correct, John?
I want to say 5, 6. So approved or constructed, because that's a different count.
Approved, because they'll ultimately be constructed unless there's some legal case that prevents them from.
Yep.
being.
So you've got Mechanic Street, you've got TJ Solar, you've got Lumber Street, you've got Hayden Row, you've got East Main, and you've got Franklin.
And these are all, because of our conversation the other day, John, I want to clarify this for the committee here. These are all large solar projects. These are not 3 to 4 acres, backyard kinds of things. These are 10 plus acres, correct?
Yes.
So I ask you guys, do we want more major solar farms in Hopkinton? I mean, is this something that we think our land is useful for? Or do we want to have some kind of restriction like Wellesley or Weston, where they just basically said, look, there's no solar farms more than 3 acres. And it sort of cuts out a whole lot of people trying to make money just off the land, quick buck, nasty to look at, view shed. We don't even have to worry about debating that. But I'm asking you guys, because the other thing that came up to me recently is the fact that we were looking at some solar area around the highway, and in reading the concerns of the neighbors who are going to be near that new expanded 9495 construction, they want noise barriers because of the amount of sound that's going to be emanating through the highway there. Well, I guarantee you, when you take all the trees around the highway off that area for solar, you're going to hear a lot more traffic, a lot more noise. And I already hear too much as it is. I'm concerned about that. So I'm totally against more 10 acre plus solar farms in Hopkinton. We don't see it in the other towns that we want to emulate. We just don't see it like that. So, I mean, if there's some way we can reduce the amount of acreage, I'm for preserving our land for other uses, and hopefully to use as noise barriers, or avoiding view sheds, issues, getting around this problem with the legal stuff.
So, Madam Chair, I think speak to one of those points.
Okay, go ahead.
So restricting solar to lots that would be less than 5 acres, for argument's sake, you said 3 acres, but let's just say, argument's sake, 5 acres. What would the benefit to public health, safety, or welfare be by doing that? Because that's the test that has to be answered. And Wellesley and Weston have done it, but there could be other reasons why they could get away with it and Hopkinton may not. The chief one being that the land in Wellesley and Weston is likely more expensive just at a base level than it is in Hopkinton. So the economics of putting solar on that land, getting a 10-acre parcel of land in Wellesley may not be feasible for solar, and it might not work out financially for the developer, whereas something like that in Hopkinton may work out. So they have not gotten a challenge yet to their bylaw that may be overly restrictive because of that. Whereas Hopkinton, if you make the lot size 5 acres maximum, and you only put 5 of them out there, somebody may challenge in court, and you would need to answer that test of how does the restriction to only have those parcels indicated meet the test for public safety, health, and welfare.
Thank you, John.
And I don't know what that would be.
Yeah, I don't know either right now, but that's not for a discussion for right this moment. And thanks, Ria, as well, for your thoughts on this. Right now, we're just going to go to John showing us maps that we have at our fingertips and that we can use if we choose to. And when we get back to the outline, when we talk about each specific type of restriction that we might want to put on solar, then we will talk through each one and determine how we can justify those. All right? Okay, go ahead, Jen. Do you want to just share your screen and then bring up each map? Okay.
So can everyone see this?
Yep.
Oh. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to walk through how I did this. Basically, what the end goal was is trying to find parcels that would be viable for solar. And not necessarily the best fit for solar, but just where solar could theoretically even be located. So this is a parcel map of Hopkinton, and this is relatively up to date. There may be some changes, and I should probably put that caution at the beginning, is that all of this data that I'm getting is from MassGIS, and so it's not all up to date all the time. It may be a year or two out of date, and you'll notice that a lot on one of the layers that we use is preserved open space. A lot of the OSLPDs that have been approved in Hopkinton, the open space preservation land development, the cluster subdivisions, are required to have a certain percentage of open space dedicated as part of them, and those are not always captured in the open space. So I just want to say,
Chair, I'm just going to make a small suggestion. If it is possible at all, if it's permitted, could you also have a Google Maps open? I mean, it's just as a frame of reference. This doesn't have any text, so sometimes it's confusing. If you can just have maybe a map of Hopkinton on Google Maps, so that if you can just go back and forth and say that parcel represents 135 or 85, or if that's possible.
So I don't know how to share 2 windows at the same time.
No, you don't. I'm hoping that when we talk about a parcel, you can then switch to Google Maps just so that people have some context of where it is on a real life map.
Yep, we can figure that out as we go through. And just so
thanks.
for some context, can you see my cursor right now?
Yes.
This is Main Street, right?
Okay.
495.
Yep.
So you get a little bit of Wood Street up here. Okay, so this is a parcel map. This is just to show you how the parcels are laid out in Hopkinton, right? So then we go to, there's going to be 2 development restriction maps. One of them is natural resources, and this one shows ACECs, which are areas of critical environmental concern. There's really only one that's down here. I should take it back. There's 2. There's one up here, and then one down here. And those are protected habitats. They're obviously areas of critical environmental concern. There's also DEP wetlands, which are the bright blue. You kind of see them a little bit. They're the more linear and kind of spottish ones. Then you've got the water bodies. I think everyone's familiar with what water bodies are in town. So I put these
What
in
is
here.
that one? I'm sorry. What is that one where your cursor is near right now? That one
This
in the
one?
middle there.
It actually may be a wetland that they're classifying as a water body because I can see the wetland
Okay.
underneath it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are areas where you're not going to really be able to put solar anyway, right? You're not going to put solar on docks in the lake. ACECs have a set of regulations that will make it really challenging to put solar on, and plus the land there probably wouldn't be that desirable for solar to begin with. And wetlands, you'd have the extra issue of going through Concom, and that's not always something that developers want to do. So took these portions out just as a beginner discussion point. The next step is habitat and protected areas that might be critical, that you don't really want to see developed, trees clear cut, specifically for solar. So you've got protected open space, and that is state-owned land, DCR-owned land, conservation restricted land, that type of thing. And you can see some of these developments, like here, there's an OSLPD with the open space around it, same, I think, down around here. But then you've got some that aren't captured, like this one over here. And that's because it's a state level map. So they may not have gotten to that point yet, or the CRs may not have been properly handled, so they're not in place yet. They're just kind of in limbo. So that's the reason why some of these things might be left out. But for the most part, protected open spaces here. You've got Biomap 2 core habitat and Biomap 2 critical natural landscape. Those are two things in Massachusetts that I think they're pretty self-explanatory. They're critical environments. They're crucial for native species, and something that if you were to take away habitat from being developed, those would be the primary areas that you'd want to preserve. So those items removed from the parcel map, not necessarily taking those entire parcels out, that'll come later. This is actually just taking the raw land out of the question. That leaves us with a map that looks like this. So all of the areas in yellow are areas that are theoretically viable for solar. They don't include water bodies, they don't include wetlands, they don't include protected open space, and you could theoretically put solar there. Obviously, a lot of residential properties, obviously a lot of properties that are already constructed. But when you're looking at zoning, you're not necessarily looking what can be developed right now. It's where you want it to be developed in the future. So parcels of land that may get, not used as they are now could still be considered for solar, even though they may have some kind of development on them. So once we take the solar viable land, we then select the parcels that contain that land. And that gives us this. And I've scaled these by lot size. So these are all the parcels that are viable for solar. They have a portion of their property that is viable for solar, broken down to under 3 acres, and that's in the gray, over 3 acres, or I should say 3 acres to 5 acres, and that's in the green, 5 acres to 7.5 acres is in yellow, 7.5 acres to 10 acres is in orange, and 10 acres and more is in red. So this might be a little bit clearer if we go and take the background out. You can see the white rather than here where it might blend in a little bit. So where it's colored are solar viable parcels. And that's the extent of our analysis so far. I want to add on some other things that I've looked at. So these are the contours, so the elevation in town overlaid onto these solar viable parcels. And what that does is you can do an analysis in GIS that shows you percentage slope rise. And from what I've been able to see in my research, just looking at articles and other things with solar and how other states have regulated it, they've required additional stormwater management for solar that is placed on land that is 10% or more in slope rise. I don't know if we want to go with 10% or more because that's pretty restrictive in Hopkinton, but I don't think it would be out of bounds. And I talked to town council about this, and they thought the same thing. To say, since Hopkinton has an issue with flooding, and Hopkinton has an issue with erosion during storm events, making a restriction on the higher slope percentage is not something that would be outright dismissed by town council as something that we could use to restrict solar development. So it's not a lot of land, but yellow is 10% or more, or sorry, yellow is 15% or more, orange is 20% or more, and then red is basically up to the highest slope rise, which is almost 24%. So these are really kind of the steepest areas of town. So it may be worth looking at to see if this is where solar could also be restricted, taking these parcels out of the equation. Obviously, it doesn't change that much because there's not a lot of that type of land, but it's something to think about. And if there are any other shapefiles, if you go onto mass data layers and see any other shapefiles that you think might be reasonable to include in this analysis to say, let's take some of these parcels out because this is something that we want to protect, or this is something that affects the public health, safety, and welfare of the residents, then we can do that. This is kind of just an initial analysis. So I'm going to go back to this one. Is there another actually map that you guys thought might be helpful I can just live on?
First of all, would any ZAC members have specific questions on these maps for John? And then I'll ask if any of you have specific other information that you would want to see on a map for a future meeting.
I think that the gray map with the labeling where the lakes are and everything like that is more helpful.
Yeah, 4A.
Yeah,
I agree.
because I just keep looking at it going, well, what is that again?
I felt we have a lot of maps. I think we have enough maps to discuss. It felt to me that the map that John is showing right now, with the viability percentage, or rather the acreage, gives us, at least in my perspective, gives a good basis to start the conversation, along with other maps as well. So I'm not certain I need more maps besides what has been produced.
Anyone else?
But to the chair, this is Rachel. Can we, I agree, these maps are really helpful. Is there a description about how the zones break down next to roads or under roads? Like I can see that there's large sections next to 495, or is that under Route 495?
So 495 is this parcel. There's nothing under 495.
Okay, so, but it's highlighted as an area that's possible for solar?
Right.
And can you explain a little how that is possible? Is it next to the highway?
So it's possible because there's no wetlands, there's no water bodies, there's no protected open space. There's nothing from the previous maps on this land. The theory when we initially talked about this in ZAC is the median for 495 could potentially be used for solar, much like the clover leaves over by exit 13 on I-90 are used for solar. And I've seen examples of solar being put on a median, not in the US necessarily, but there are examples in, say, Korea, where they've put solar in the median on a highway. They've also put a bike lane underneath that solar. But there is, that's why it was included. And the fact that there's no restrictions that we showed on the map before this is the reason why it's still included.
Great, thank you. Just one quick follow-up question. Is there any public safety concern about putting something in a median of a highway where I assume that the median is there for people who break down, or for traffic accidents, or for state police to use? Is there any public safety concern in that?
So the median is the grassy area in the middle when you drive down the highway. That's what we were talking about, not necessarily the shoulder, not necessarily the turnaround lanes in the middle of the median that the police use. There may be public health issues there. Realistically, it would have to be MassDOT proposing to put the solar there. So they would analyze the public safety issues. I think the discussion that we had at the beginning of all of this, of why to include it, is it's there, it's land that's not being used. And if somebody wants to use it, we may as well zone it to be used, and kind of didn't really go farther than that.
I was going to say there's there are state and federal highway design requirements that require clear zones and safety zones, setbacks for a immovable object. It would have to be complied with if somebody was trying to develop the right of way for solar.
And then the way I'm looking at it is, since we pulled out all the other state-owned land and the town-owned land, that we should probably,
We didn't
Hold-
pull out the town-owned land.
oh, no, not town-owned, I meant the under conservation restrictions.
Right, protected land. So
Protected.
even, there may be state, I mean, I doubt there is, but there may be state-owned land on this map that's just not under protection. I don't know what it would be. DCR owns some land that may not have been under protection, and that could still be in this map. Town-owned land that's not under protection is still in this map.
Now,
Um, Sorry, go ahead, John.
could the state, again, if the state wanted to put something on one of their exits, so, sort of like on the Mass Pike, where they have it at the Mass Pike and what 126, is, or Route 9, is that could something like that happen to Hopkinton, whether or not we have restrictions or not? Can the
That's a good
state over,
question.
the state over can the state overrule town bylaws?
It would depend, I think, on the type of development. I'd have to look into that. I don't know off the top of my head.
Because I know that when it comes to like power plants and that kind of stuff, that town bylaws get automatically overridden because of I think we signed off on that about 10 years ago. Everybody got a 15% cut in their bill for 2 years, and we gave up to control any of that stuff. Okay.
So I had two things to add. One is that just to add on to what John said about the 495 corridor, Rachel, it's not just the median. There's also the edges. I've seen solar on the edges of the highway. Most particularly it's on 90, the Mass Pike, somewhere closer to Boston. I can't remember exactly what town it's near. It's past Natick, I think. So
There is, Mary,
It's
there is,
Weston.
Weston?
there's actually big arrays in Natick, near the interchange there. But
and
yeah,
there's the Weston, I guess.
Yep.
Somebody just mentioned. Yeah.
but those are right next to commercial developed areas. They're not on top of residential areas.
Mhm.
Our residential zone goes right up to 495 in most
Yeah.
cases.
Except for industrial A, which
Right.
we have.
Right.
So there's that corridor. But yes, that's, I'm just saying, this is theoretical. I know there's lots of reasons not to as well. So I also wanted to point out that, John, there's a body of water that appears on the body of water map that's down at the end of 490, between 495 and 85. It's the end of 85. It's Echo Lake. And it's on the 4A map, it shows up as a big red spot. That's all protected. That's that would not be one of those.
So it may be protected land and not captured in the protected land layer. But this is what I'm assuming what you're talking about.
Yep. That's
Yeah,
a
so-
body of water. So-
Yeah, so it's not shown as solar viable land. It's just that there are portions of the property
Yep.
that are viable. So that's why that parcel was included. Because
Okay.
with zoning, you're not necessarily zoning portions of a parcel. You're zoning the entire parcel,
Okay.
and then it would be up
That's
to the
that's a
developer.
lake. And and it shows as this big red spot, and it's really
Right.
not.
So that's like I said, that if this land is protected, we could take it out.
Yeah.
But but from what I have in terms of data, hard data on the GIS, it's not considered protected land.
Well,
So
I have
that's
no
why we're-
idea how it's actually zoned, but it's Milford Water Supply, so it's considered from that perspective. So it might be useful to have this parcel's viable with also the bodies of water on there. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want you to do it right now. I'm just saying that, if you see my point, that even if the parcel itself is viable for solar, it's unrealistic to see it that way because the body of water is in the middle there, taking up most of the space. And so, it wouldn't be a several 100-acre solar farm potentially. It's probably hard for people to visualize it anyhow, so.
Good catch,
right.
though. Good catch.
So here's the map.
Yeah, this looks, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, okay, so that, it's easy for me to catch because Echo Lake's right in my backyard, so.
Majority of the country, New York Times reports that Joe Biden is poised to unleash a series of executive actions on his birthday.
Hello?
Prompting, promoting.
Is somebody not on mute?
And I think Ron Nation was not on
Okay.
mute, so I muted him.
Okay, is some of the Legacy Farms area, is that like not quite caught up on the GIS map?
Correct, yeah.
Okay,
So like the restricted land for Legacy Farms is probably not captured in the open space layer.
yep,
So we would need to do a local level cleanup of the open space and just see what actually is still protected.
Mhm.
And that kind of just takes some institutional knowledge to go through and pick things
Absolutely.
out.
Okay, thank you so much. Does anyone have any other questions regarding the maps before we go back to the outline? No? I need to get the whole gallery of people here. Okay, there we go. And I don't see anybody raising their hand or anything. Okay. Then I will go back to my screen share for discussion. Oops, sorry. Okay. So I wrote down what John just clarified for us. So this is the line from the Mass state law. Towns may not prohibit or unreasonably regulate the installation of solar energy systems. And then they have a line about the structures, et cetera, except where necessary to protect the public health, safety, or welfare. So our town council new clarified advice is each of our changes or restrictions that we would make in the solar bylaw must be specifically justified, necessary to protect public health, safety, or welfare. Very few legal precedents, none that we know of. And perhaps that's just another thing that, John, you can check on. Any legal precedents that help us at all to interpret this would be helpful. Because when this goes to planning board, they're going to have to deal with this concept as well. Because I'm sure that they're going to have the comments back from town council as planning board is going through public forum on this, whatever it is we send back to them. So I'm just paging down here. I'm going to send this out to you all, but this is an outline where I'm going to reduce it just slightly to see if I can get it all on one page. No, guess not. Okay. So I just categorized as best I could the categories of things that not only we have considered and thought of through the various discussions, but also what the public has brought up for us. So first I put, and this is open for changes and updates along the way. But I think that what we need to do to think about this solar bylaw before we think about a zoning overlay map again is to consider each of these potential restrictions or changes to our current bylaw and decide what to do on each one of these, including, of course, the whole town council thing about the justification based on health, safety, welfare, and how we do that. So the criteria, lot criteria, so things that fall within the lot criteria, maximum size acreage, also minimum lot size. We currently, in our bylaw, have a 3-acre minimum. Percentage of the lot that can be developed for solar, setbacks, and that can be a standard increase in setbacks over what is current, or we can be creative and do it slightly different way. And the whole grade, ridge lines, hilltops, either prohibit or reduce the use of it, or whatever the case may be. There's screening, so sight lines, looking at sight lines, requiring sight lines from all public ways, from trails, from abutters, however we want to define that. Screening, obviously there's already screening language in the bylaw, and we strengthened it a couple of years ago, but there may be additional changes we want to make. The quantity or depth of the screening. Right now, of course, solar developers come in and try to maximize their yield off of the site by putting as many panels as possible. And then it's the question of, just putting one line of trees or 2 lines of trees versus having enough of a setback to put in a lot more of the screening, before you reach where the panels are themselves. The year-round type of foliage that will screen, that is already in the bylaw. There's also maintenance rules in the bylaw, but again, the language could be strengthened potentially. Vegetation, do we want to specify in the bylaw the types of vegetation, types of trees, that sort of thing. Berms were mentioned last time and have been discussed before. We can specifically mention berms. I actually, when I was rereading the bylaw, John Gelsich, I don't have the version that has the changes in it, but I think we even mentioned berms when we made the wording changes a year and a half ago.
So nobody has a version that has those changes because the town clerk has not given an updated version of the zoning.
Yeah, I know. And I was just wondering, I don't even know if I have what the article was voted on and so what our changes were. Anyhow, I'll look for that, or you can look for that. Reduce elevation of site, that was discussed last time a little bit. Maintenance of natural vegetation. And that could be in addition to, added screening, of course. Then comes into the stormwater regulations. Of course, there's extensive stormwater regulations we already have in town, and that these have to abide by. But we may want to strengthen the issues and the language in the solar bylaw. Erosion control, protection of private wells, could be an issue of distance from. Not sure, other language that we could add. I don't know what this one was supposed to be. I think I started typing something and it didn't quite get there, general something. And then finally, when we get to the bottom of this, we can also refer back to the maps and seeing whether or not an overlay is what we consider the best way to deal with this. I would like to open this up to additional items to add to this list. And this is something that we are going to go through point by point over the next however many meetings we need to get through this solar bylaw. and deliver something but back to planning board by the end of the year or early January. Unless we hear different for the timeline. Okay? So any changes to this outline? Suggestions?
Mary, how do we take into account the objectives that you outlined at the beginning of this, and how does that play into this list?
How do you suggest?
Well, I think it makes sense to filter all of our discussions through these objectives if that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that needs to be added to this or if that's just an overall filter for each one of these as we go through them.
That's kind of the way I looked at it as well, is that this is filtering any changes that we suggest. We look at it from the point of view of these objectives, and does it meet the objectives? And then as we're going through, obviously we're talking about potentially changing a lot of different things, and then we'll have to look at the whole picture of what we have discussed changing and refilter it through those objectives. Do we have the right balance? So I think we're going to have to do it along the way.
Mary, to that right balance, what I'd also like to add, being on the select board for the last 6 years, is that we have to, when we finish the whole thing, be careful not to go too far one way and then just dare somebody to sue us, because suits are very expensive.
Right.
Whenever it just seems whenever we get sued as a town, we lose, and they get very, very expensive. So let's, and when we originally did the first one, that was one of the things that we were always cautioned on, is that, look, we want to get something through. We went to basically what we thought was the maximum protections we could put in at the time. So we have to really walk that fine line as to not look like we're begging for a lawsuit, because they do get expensive. And so just towards the end, let's just run through it one more time through town council and through John to make sure that we're not overstepping our bounds.
Good, thank you.
Mary,
Yes.
the other thing at the end is what will pass at town meeting. I think the
Yes.
more detailed we make this, the more nits there are to pick and the harder it is for things to get passed. So it needs to be some sort of simple messaging at the end of this. Otherwise, it's going to sink, and months of not even months, over a year of our work is going to be flushed away. So there has to be some sort of marketing that we think about as well. What is understandable / sellable?
Do we have any marketing people on the board?
No.
Mary, there is something that's missing on screening, which is the noise pollution when you remove trees for solar panels.
Good, thank you.
There's also the point that Jane Moran came up with at the last meeting, which is the language that we have is weighted much more heavily than an overlay map per se. I don't know that to be the truth, but that is what her understanding is. I trust she's been doing this longer than me. So I would look for specific language. If she is listening in tonight, I would ask her for language that she has recommended to curtail this. Again, if we've already got 5 or 6 of these big, huge solar farms, I don't think that we need any more of them. I think we should figure out a way to restrict it, whether it is a percentage of the lot or the size of the lot. But, quite frankly, I've been studying sustainable lifestyle stuff for 9 years now, and this is definitely not the route to go.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
through the chair. So I think some concerned citizens shared with us the model bylaws that were created by the town of Athol. So it does seem to me that we can definitely look at that, and at least the large grade artifacts, such as what factors have been considered in the document. We can try and assess whether that merits inclusion in our overview here.
Yes, I read through all of the model bylaw produced by the Tufts study, and I believe it's captured here in terms of the outline. But
Sure.
I agree that we should refer back to it, particularly because it's got great wording. So once we decide what we want to do within the town, then we can borrow wording from them as
Okay.
well. So that I think that can be very useful because their language is nicely honed.
Mary,
Yes.
along the lines of the Athol thing, without putting anybody on the spot, I wanted to open the door to the public. I think the gentleman who brought the Athol information to us is in the meeting. And I just thought right now might be a time. I think he put a lot of time into looking through the Athol Tufts study.
Yep.
And I wanted to open the door to him if he wants to give us some thoughts as we look at this outline. If he doesn't, that's fine. I don't want to put anyone on the spot.
Would anyone like to speak?
I don't even want to name him for fear of putting him on the spot.
I know. So anyone in the public who would like to participate at this point?
Yeah, it's Sean, Mary.
Hello.
Yeah,
Please go ahead.
yeah, that's all right, Ted. You can put me on the spot. No worries. I hope that you disseminated. I sent it to John too, to send to the rest of the board.
John, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. Mary, does he need to give his name and address?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
64 Teresa Road, Sean Kimball.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So one of the documents that I sent to Ted and Sundar, and I'd be happy to send it to the rest of the board, was a soft copy. We cut and paste the PDF and put it into Word. And we highlighted certain sections that we thought should be considered, not necessarily verbatim, but for purposes of discussion in that model bylaw.
Yeah. And we all received that annotated copy.
Okay.
Thank you. Some of the points I noticed, and not to say that you didn't realize that it was already in the bylaw, but you probably just said, take a look again and make sure that the wording is strong enough and so on. But there were certain points that were covered, but may still need some look.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. No, we didn't necessarily go word for word between what our bylaw says and the Athol one. It just, when going through the Athol, we said, all right, these are the things that we heard in multiple discussions throughout the planning board discussions in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Mary?
Yeah, I thought it was a great model bylaw. And the reference points are very interesting too, just to know that pulling things from various towns and so on. It was helpful to know that.
Well, that's exactly what I thought too. And also having those references, these other towns have had these same discussions. They're being held by the same guidance that our legal counsel's giving us.
Right.
Right. So I am kind of curious what those towns did to mitigate that, because they have the same concerns we do.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly, they have different town councils and they have different, perhaps different level of risk mitigation. So in terms of lawsuits, but I think that it would be great to find out more about each of those towns and whether or not there has been anything, any lawsuits, any possible lawsuits, complaints from developments or anything like that yet.
Mary?
Or even if all the new bylaws are in place.
Mary?
Go ahead.
Sean, thank you so much for pulling that stuff together. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I have two questions for you. I'll throw them both out and you can respond to either one or none. I'm wondering if, given how much time you spent with that tough study, if you see anything in Mary's outline, or if you don't see something that ought to be included. But my other question is, I think, but you put a lot more time into it, that's the Tufts proposal. I'm wondering, did Athol adopt any of it? Did they go through their town meeting? Did they get shot down? I don't even know if it got to a point where it could be challenged in law if it was never made a new bylaw in Athol. Do you know?
I do know that they went through and did a study. I think the this report was done, and then they said, all right, let's get community feedback. And that's when when you hit that website, one of the links I sent, you'll see that they have, they sent out surveys to the community to figure out, all right, what does the community want as a whole? Probably my guess is more as anticipation of going to town meeting, right? For the same reasons you just illustrated earlier is, all right, can we get general consensus to get these bylaws passed? What does the town want? And I think that's where it stands right now. I think they're still getting feedback and then they're proposing.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because as impressive as that document was, that is 3 town meetings by itself, it seems to me, to try to, if that was what was ultimately proposed at a town meeting. It seems incredibly thorough and incredibly difficult to deal with at a town meeting at the same time, or maybe because it's so thorough, it's difficult.
Right, because some of the applicability is so broad, such as, planning board shall not permit a building that is injurious, noxious, offensive, which is a vague word again, or detrimental. So that kind of language, or unsightly. I mean, those are terms that are broad by definition. So that's the kind of guidelines the document has given. So I was actually had the same curiosity as Ted about, was that adopted and then turned into a bylaw? Because that seems broad in nature rather than narrow.
It sounds like it's more of an academic kind of a paper rather than a paper that actually could be created into a law, a bylaw. But we use that as a guideline to help us get to the language that gets us to where we can go. I think the best way to deal with this so we can get through town meeting is to pick one item that does the restriction across the board, and then you layer some of the screening stuff after it, and that's the best way to deal with it, because people are going to recognize if you have a maximum and minimum lot size of 3 acres and say 50% of it is being used for solar installation, and we say, well, the reason it's only 50% is because it abuts a residential area, because most of the land that's left for solar appears to be abutting residential. So these are the things that we can say to the health, safety, and welfare of the population.
How would we say, because it abuts residential, yeah.
So
what would you say?
Well, I would say that certainly woods and trees and where plants and trees and animals live is a healthy, alternative to hardscape that is, not interactive with the human population. I mean, this is main reason why people come live in Hopkinton. I mean, is to be here around, the nature. But if we take all the nature, when we put some inactive element on it that is not helpful to anybody other than one group of people who are extracting, some money off of it, that's not to the benefit of and welfare of the population.
But I think
we could actually look at, if this actually has happened in other towns, we could look at their language too and see what they have. But I just looked at like where Wellesley had their zoning map for solar overlay. they have one little section for it. So they must have had some language that protected the rest of the town. I guess what we need to do is, if we were really serious, we'd look at every single parcel that potentially could be a solar, farm of some sort, and say, okay, this is, abutting this neighborhood, or this is abutting this conservation area, or that, you know what I'm saying? Like, we could go that route. It's just, I don't know how much time we have. I mean, we don't have enough time. Is I guess what I'm trying to say. So trying to figure out something simple, which is what Ted's saying, is, like, if we were trying to get this through town meeting, we need to come up with something simple, like the percentage of the site or the size of the site, and come up with language to support it.
To the chair, can I offer something sort of
Yes.
following on to that?
Yes.
So part of the lot criteria I don't see, and that is something that we talk about for residential developments, is density of housing that you could put in a certain size. Is there any possibility, and I'm open to suggestions, about regulating the density of the number of solar panels that can be put on every lot? And therefore, if we require spacing for public health and safety, can we do that here as well? Like we do when we require new houses to have an acre lot, or, other kinds of zoning laws like that. And I'm not as familiar with the laws as many of the people on this call, so I appreciate some feedback on that.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I was also going to say, I'm not terribly familiar with all of the zoning bylaws, but a lot of communities I've worked in the past, a commercial or industrial development had different setback requirements, whether it was abutting residential or another commercial or other industrial, whereas the setback from residential may be 50 feet, the setback from an adjacent industrial might be 10 feet. So I don't know if that could be rolled into it as, what zoning is adjacent to these parcels to maybe increase screening for residential areas.
John Gelsich, our current bylaws, can you just review the setback requirements? And I think there is some wording in the subdivision bylaws and things like that about a larger setback between commercial and residential, or industrial and residential.
Yeah, so the setbacks are the underlying zoning. The difference is, or I shouldn't say the difference, the one time where it is different is, I need to try and find it, it's when there's a commercial use abutting a residential use, that the setbacks need to be a little bit bigger. I believe it's 200 feet, but otherwise they would be the underlying zoning.
It's 200 feet?
200 feet is when a commercial area, I'm going to bring it up. I need to find it. Get the actual wording.
So through the chair, does that mean we cannot have additional setbacks for a commercial solar farm beyond what is prescribed by the underlying zoning? Is that what it means? We can't come up with new regulations for that?
No, it doesn't mean that so much as we're just, understanding our baseline of where we are right now, and whether or not we can increase that.
Okay.
And I think that there's justification for increasing setbacks from roads as well, from public ways, as well as from abutting residential. Again, just from the standpoint of the visibility of it, and to some extent noise buffering, depending on how busy the street is that we're talking about.
Okay.
So it's not 200 feet. I misspoke. It is buffers of non-residential buffers around non-residential uses in residential districts. The buffer shall be no less than 25 feet wide in a Residence A district, 50 feet wide in a Residence B and RLF district, and 70 feet wide, 75 feet wide in an agricultural district.
Okay. Residence A, Residence B, and agricultural.
And RLF, residential
RLF?
lakefront.
Okay. Is there a Residence B, or am I
There's
making?
a residence. Yep, there's a residence B.
And agricultural. Okay.
Mary,
Yep.
I just want to back up a second and ask a big picture thing of John. John, I'm looking at those three criteria: health, safety, and that maddeningly squishy welfare. Are those the criteria solely for commercial solar zoning, or is that all zoning laws need to meet the criteria of they help the town's health, safety, and welfare?
So there is a similar type of language for zoning, but that three-part test is specifically for solar.
Is there something as squishy as welfare for all other zoning?
Yeah, generally.
So I think this is my point. I know that we are concerned about protecting private property rights. And I know we don't want to get sued because whether you win or lose, it costs money. But every zoning law we have impinges on private property rights. Every single one. That's the whole point of zoning. I could make a whole lot of money if I opened up a drive-through right down the road here from the middle school and the high school, and I've had kids flowing in here, but I'm not allowed to because my private property rights are restricted by zoning. And I could sue and say it would be in the town's welfare, or whatever the word is for the other zoning, to have this. Look how many happy kids there would be that could come by and they don't have to walk all the way downtown. And I will make more money, and that will give the town more money because they can tax it. It's in the town's welfare. My point is, I don't want to get sued. I don't want to overly burden property rights, but I don't want to be terrified of a lawsuit when all zoning impinges on private property rights and all zoning has the same squishy language. So just kind of big picture thought I want to share.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other additions to the outline?
Yeah, I kind of thought the requiring a bond or something to address if they ever just abandoned the property and left, that the town would have a way to go in and restore it.
We do have that.
We do have that. Okay.
We do have that in our current bylaw, but I'll put it on here anyhow. The maintenance, it's maintenance and what is it called when it's abandoned?
Abandoned.
And
Abandonment. Vacating the property and
financial, just a bond. I'll just put that in. But and you know, obviously all of us need to reread the current solar bylaw and understand what's there right now. But we should, you know, just take a look at the language and make sure that it makes sense and it's strong enough. From my experience, and I'm sure John and Sundar can pipe up as well, but in my experience on planning board thus far, we generally don't have a problem negotiating that kind of financial bonds. We don't have much of a problem negotiating screening to a certain extent, but we have, and we absolutely have pushed back when developers have, you know, gotten, oh, you know, I'm not quite meeting this setback, but, you know, it's only 5 feet. And we basically say, no, you have to meet the setback for this, so things like that, planning board has not had problems with that, but for instance, setbacks, I haven't seen planning board, and I can't quite picture us being able to say, yeah, we're going to definitely make all the setbacks larger for this project because we think this particular abutter situation requires it. Even though there's language in the bylaw that says, yeah, we have some leeway with that, I don't see how planning board would be able to justify it on the spot in situations like that. So I think setbacks are something that, are realistically could change things if we have it in the bylaw itself, that it's bigger and that so on. But the screening, things like that, that's just my experience thus far is that we have good luck negotiating the screening, the types of screening, and adapting it to the particular sites. And I know that there'll be people who say, yeah, but what about that development and so on. I'm not saying for every development that it's ever been done in town. I'm just saying for the last few that have been negotiated while I've been on the board, those are the things that the planning board has been able to negotiate. And there's, setbacks are something that we really can't negotiate much. So as an example.
Mary?
Yeah.
Just following up on that, in the Conservation Commission,
Yes.
we've also been very firm about buffer zone from wetlands, and we've had the same thing specifically with solar development, but we're only 10 feet in, and the Conservation Commission has been very firm about buffer zones with these developments as well. Curtis, when he mentioned the bond, reminded me of one thing from the Athol Tufts study that I don't know if it's zoning, I don't know if it's part of our world, but it was an interesting little bit. There was something in there about payment from a commercial solar developer in lieu of taxes. There was kind of an acknowledgement that you don't get a whole lot of tax revenue out of solar, especially with government, state, Commonwealth encouraging of solar. But there was something about payment to the town in lieu of the lost taxes. I don't know if that's part of our discussion or not. I don't know how that works, but that was an interesting little bit from that study.
I don't recall that particular piece. So I'm just I made a note of it so that we can address it when the time comes. So that is curious to me.
Mary, we would all consider the solar farm to be a business, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the business district currently in our zoning bylaws has a maximum lot coverage of 60%. I recommend we use that as one of the guidelines here.
Okay.
So through the chair, the minimum lot size that you've called out, which is currently 3 acre minimum.
Yeah.
Does anything prevent us from increasing that to 5 or 7 or even 10?
No, that's something to be discussed.
Okay. So there is definitely discussion. So currently it's 3. We are not going to discuss right now what that minimum ought to be, but you feel that can be
We can
definitely
as
adjusted.
as soon as we get to the point of going through each
Okay.
point.
Okay.
So yes, I'm definitely, that's open. So any other comments for the outline itself?
Mary,
Yes.
this is Mike Sullivan.
Hi.
Hi, 59 Teresa Road.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, there are a number of things in here that have been picked up from the Athol report and the model bylaws. And one of the things that I noticed when I was going through it is that there's also pretty good provisions in there for the town. So in terms of requirements for professional plans, things of that nature, access to the site. So I might encourage you in one of these sections here to maybe consider those things from the town's perspective.
Absolutely.
It might be helpful. And if I could go back to the residential for a moment,
Yes, please.
going through the Athol report and going through the model bylaws, there are a number of terms relating to screening, for example, year-round screening, glare, unsightly views, hilltops, ridge lines, scenic roads, topography. And those things, to me, are encouraging for people who are considering the solar to look at it and understand what is going to be important to the board, the planning board eventually, in terms of approvals. And I would suggest that inclusion of those things, they can be done in such a way that it's not going to jeopardize things from a town council's perspective of looking at it. And I bring up an example, I think it was at the last meeting that Mr. Nation, Ron Nation, I think he's on tonight, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was very heartening to me because at least by reputation, I know him to be a developer in town. He may or may not have an interest in solar, but he actually inquired whether grading was considered on one of the current commercial sites. And I'm not suggesting we put in a percentage of grading, but I'm just trying to show as an example that if grading was a consideration for the board when it was looking at these projects, that wouldn't be looked over. It would be looked at. And a lot of this, from a legal perspective, and I did spend 3 decades in energy law, and I'm not saying that from an expertise because this is Greek and Latin to me, but a lot of things that can be put into these regulations. For example, when Ron mentioned the grading, I wouldn't go so far as putting in percentages of grade, but the fact that it's there will bring people's attention to it. And the other thing, which I might suggest as a time saver, at least if I was doing this project, and I'm saying it from a legal perspective, looking at it, it might be easier since this model act, and I'm not advocating you adopt it. I'm just saying, for looking at it, it would probably be easier and the least cost alternative to ask town council to look at the model act, take out a highlighter and read out what they think is not possible or likely to pass muster with the state. And I say that from a perspective because we've lived with some solar developments here, and I don't mean to pick on it, but you know, if you use the word welfare and you take a look at what happened to some of the homes in my neighborhood over in Alexander, to me, that fits the definition. So if we're going to be in a situation where we can't require any more than 75 feet in terms of a project coming into a residential area, then maybe year-round screening. I don't know how you would accomplish that, but at least the words would have some meaning, because right now, 6 months of the year, there is no screening on that particular project. So, and I'm not trying to bring that up for any reason other than to do these things and have all of us as residents, neighbors, have people like Mr. Nation trying to come up with good ideas how to maybe make a project better. That's all great, but you've got, you know, arrows coming at you from every direction trying to piece these things in. So if somebody could go through something in that model act, I did check out a few of the sites in there, and there's hundreds of them. And I went into some of the towns and looked, and they've actually adopted some of the language. The language is in some of their bylaws. So that all I'm thinking is it's very complete. You would have a picture in front of you, and you would know that if you're going to look at it and you're going to try to use it in part or in total, I don't care, then you know what you shouldn't be looking at in that before it finally goes to a planning board and then for another review by outside counsel. So that's just a suggestion.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And sorry, regarding
I've got a contribution to the outline. Deborah Feinberg, 12 Prestwick Drive. I don't know if this would kind of get into the way of Concom instead of a ZAC contribution to the solar law, but I thought that going through and identifying what types of soil were acceptable and where the water table exists within the site, or whether there's a certain water table that may be impinged upon. So
and water table, and I'm sorry, you said
soil types.
Soil types. I recognize that some of these things might, this is directed to John Gausich. This is something that I'd like to look in offline a little bit. Both the ATHOL or the model solar bylaw that Mr. Sullivan was referencing, as well as, you know, this water table and stormwater regulations in general. And understanding, you know, from an expert point of view from you, John, that what is covered by our stormwater regulations and what is not. And I'm not entirely sure, even, you know, even reading through the stormwater regs and things like that. So so I'd like to get your thoughts on that, not today, but at a future time point, to just review what protections are already in place. They're not necessarily in the solar bylaw, but they're in the special permit applications, stormwater regs, and things like that. So so I'm leaving all of these things on here, but that's something that we're going to need your expert advice on in the future. Okay. And thank you, Deb. Anything else? Any other suggestions? Okay. So it is 8:30. I wanted to know whether or not the members of the ZAC would like to discuss any of the first few items, maximum size or minimum lot size, and start that discussion tonight. Or whether we should leave it to our next meeting to start the discussion of each point. Because I could go for another half an hour or so if you want to.
Is there anybody else from the town that wants to speak on it? We should probably make sure. Do we have to close a public hearing and to start discussing,
No,
or do we keep it
It
open?
hasn't been an official, like, public
Oh, okay.
hearing that we've
Okay.
opened, you know, so, because there's no language for them to comment on. It's just, you know, we're just
Okay,
taking
good.
comments as they come, so to speak. So
I would be supportive of starting discussions on the acreage conversation and go for another 30 minutes.
Okay.
I would be supportive of that.
Everyone okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, good. Excellent. So we could possibly talk about maximum and minimum lot sizes together. So that's what I'm going to suggest that we do. Just my opening thoughts is think about, you know, having a minimum lot size means that we're making sure that people aren't doing lots of small things throughout the town. They're limited by the lot size or adjoining lots, that they'd have to find a large enough area that is currently vacant.
6 times.
That's
Oh,
right. He
mute your
liked what
phone.
you had to say.
Mute your
I thought
computer.
That was pretty good.
Thank you.
During the interruption, if I may, actually, why don't we look at it in since we've got that map that really breaks it down, maybe if we could even overlay our zoning map on top of it, because maybe we could look at it at different acreage for different zones, because that's what I think a lot of people are worried about, is that and why there haven't been any lawsuits in Weston and Wayland and those places, because in order to get 3 acres or 5 acres or 10 acres would be tens of millions of dollars.
Right.
And so if we look at it, from when we look at our zoning map, what sections would it maybe work in, and what sections it would actually be very detrimental. And that might be able to help us figure the sizes, as opposed to just kicking it up to 10, and then it could invoke a lawsuit from somebody from one section versus another. We could at least make it look like we're doing something more surgical.
Okay. So let's pull up the map. John.
So I'm going to just tell you right now, I do not have the zoning as a layer that I can add on to it right now.
That's fine.
I need to get that from my team.
Perhaps just the last version that we were looking at without the zoning. Okay. We're going to make this bigger. Let's see here. This one. Okay, hold on. So currently everything in color, gray included. No, not gray. Everything in color, green, yellow, orange, and coral, are 3 acres and above. So that is covered in our current solar bylaw as viable, not the gray. Those are smaller lots. Smaller.
So I will add that caveat that 2 of the smaller lots could be combined and then meet the requirement. So
Right.
just because the lots are under 3 does not mean that they are exempt from solar.
Absolutely. Okay. So if we have a maximum, that would theoretically be limiting perhaps a theoretical development that they wanted to put in a huge array. I don't know that that's a likely possibility. Not only being able to put that much land together all at once, but also, I don't know from a solar development standpoint whether or not that's something people like to do as something really, really large. So I don't know about maximum. Thoughts?
Madam Chair, was your point on reducing the maximum to some arbitrary low limit, like under 10 acres?
Could be. I'm just saying, would we want a maximum?
Yeah, so my concern is, again, we have to toe the line between not being too restrictive versus not encouraging it as well, right? So maybe we have a separation of something by right, which is between this acre range to this acre range, you can do it. By something that exceeds a certain acre range has to go through special permits. So instead of turning it off completely, maybe adding a little bit of extra hurdles to step through will stop them from going towards that direction, instead of saying you cannot do more than this many acres. The worry I have is I think during one of the public meetings, there were some property owners who came forward and said, but I wanted to include my property in the solar bylaw and this restricts me and all that stuff. So maybe finding a midpoint where it's okay for, we want to encourage, that becomes a by right, and we don't want to encourage becomes a special permit.
John Gelsich, we have a special permit requirement right now, correct? For all development?
Yeah,
All of
I
the
thought
development?
everything had to go through special permit.
Yes, all solar development has to go through special permit.
So is there like anything else, any other one level more hurdle that we can place to?
Is there a higher level that you can think of?
I mean, not allowing it and having it only done by variance is really the only way to do it. But there's no like second level of special permits.
The variances, they're not all that hard to get, are they?
They're supposed to be. Whether that's actually how they're issued is a different question, but they are supposed to be.
Okay. So, okay, that's a possibility.
So Mary, by restricting the coverage of the land, it means that you have to buy more land, assemble more land to get the same amount of power out of the land.
Yep.
And that is in itself the major restriction. So, I think that, again, I don't think we need another solar farm in town. I'm sorry to say that we've got plenty. This is we have, it's like we're getting picked over right now with every available parcel. So I feel like if we do the lot coverage, because it's a business, that's one major way of restricting this. There's another way of doing this, which is less than 10 acres as a maximum, because apparently as a financial consideration, if you're a big company, you would want more than 10 acres of land to really get the value out of the land. But I don't know if we want to be as direct as that. It's just that, quite frankly, I don't think we need another solar farm. I think the solar farms that we have are sufficient, and the solar accessory use to our buildings is a really good use for the parking lots and the buildings we have on South Street and other industrial areas. So, I mean, again, trying to simplify this so that it's not not too complicated to get through town meeting. I think that's the easiest way, is just going for the minimum lot coverage, or maximum lot coverage, rather.
John Gelsich, do you recall what the acreage, total acreage, and maybe the acreage of these solar panels themselves on the two most recently approved solar farms, Wilson Street and Franklin?
I don't, but I can look that up.
Okay. So that's something that we can put together for the next meeting to have those just to compare to. I don't disagree that I think the lot coverage is a good thing to consider. I think the minimum lot size, we could push it up to 5, but I don't think that changes a lot.
To the chair, Mary, I think back to the point about the maximum lot size, is the area of land abutting, adjacent to, underneath, next to 495, is that one piece of land? So does putting a maximum on it mean that land on 495 would be restricted from development?
John, I think it's in the GIS as one contiguous parcel, right?
495?
Yeah.
Yes, it's all one parcel.
Okay. So it's well over. And if we put a max on, it might fall off the list. Is that right?
Except they can be combined, though. That's what John said. It can be combined if we put a maximum.
Right, but are we saying the maximum size of the lot or the maximum size of the array? That's the, when you're saying maximum 10 acre array.
The map obviously is dealing with lot sizes, parcel sizes, so.
Okay, just parcel size. No, because I didn't get, I didn't get the reference.
So if you want, I've got the GIS set up here, and I can select by lot size. So like right now, I think I've selected lots greater than 15 acres, right? So if you want to select something that's 20 acres, I can do that, and you can see what lots would be included in that. I don't know if that's helpful.
Gonna select out.
Ron, I'm going to mute you because you're talking. We can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
So I don't know if that's helpful just for people to visualize what parcels are there and what size they would be. If you want to shout out lot sizes, I can do that.
But John, you told me in a conversation recently that anything that was 10 acres or more became more valuable to the solar developers. And that's not, I mean, if the town wants to encourage more solar farms, great. Let's focus on all the parcels over 10 acres. But if we're looking at over 15 acres, we're still in that gray area of 10 to 15 acres unless we have the lot coverage figured out.
I
So,
don't recall saying that 10 acres was a number that is kind of a threshold. I think I said larger lots are more valuable
all
to
right.
the developers.
I thought I got 10 acres out of you. So I don't know what the magic number is. I just know that, for example, apartment buildings today, if you're looking at 80 units or more, that goes into a different financial model than something that's under 50 units. And the desirability of 80 plus units in apartments is way more desirable than under 50 because of the cost of managing it and everything like that. I believe the solar farm has the same kind of financial modeling, and that's what I'm trying to get at, because I think that if we go and protect these larger parcels from being solar farms, then we're going to be in a better shape to use them for better things. So it's not 10 acres, John. What do you think is the magic number for the financial modeling?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not a solar developer, so I don't have any insights as to how they price out their lots versus land costs versus how much they can generate. I don't know that information.
But we do know that the last 2 or 3 solar farms are around 10 acres plus, right?
They're significantly larger than 10 acres.
But usable.
Yeah, I would say significantly more than 10 acres usable.
Okay.
Yeah.
This map definitely helps. It really does make it tighter. It helps the discussion because now at least we know where we're looking and where the issues might come through, which brings you back to the zoning areas.
So if we, if we consider that industrial A, for instance, which is just to the left of the 495 corridor, it looks like there's some yellow right at the first part of it, and then some red or coral later. But we talked last time about not wanting to necessarily encourage solar in industrial A. That section of the map would probably not be part of what we were encouraging solar. So just trying to think of another way to look at it. Is there a way we would discourage solar without having a solar overlay map? Is there a way we could discourage solar in that particular region?
Or maybe just, going back to Ted's point, where he was saying that, it's zoning is to discourage, but actually zoning is to encourage and or discourage. So if we encourage it in some areas and discourage it in others, then again, we're walking that fine line.
Right, but I'm just saying, if we're trying to, so this is just another way to look at it. So we know from previous discussions that we don't want to encourage solar in industrial A. And is there any other way other than a zoning overlay map for solar? Is there any other way? Is there any other criteria that would discourage solar in that area?
All the setbacks.
So Mary, are you talking about the 495 corridor? I mean, I would say
No.
that it's just,
It's the industrial A is our, can you show it with your cursor, John?
If you want to look at my map, there it is. That's why I'm talking, so it'll come up.
Okay.
But they're right there in the pink.
Yeah, so it's just the left of 495 corridor. It's South Street, the South Street area. And so just as a thought exercise, is there any way that we could discourage solar in that area, for instance, by any other means than simply putting it on a solar overlay map?
Mary, just for the record, discourage solar as a primary use. I think
Yes.
Leah and I, and people are with me.
We all want to see it
We love that.
in parking lots,
But
on
as long as
buildings.
we're being recorded, I just want to make it clear.
Absolutely, because the whole solar bylaw deals with only ground mounted solar, only commercial ground mounted solar. So
I know that we all know what we're talking
yeah,
about.
I know. And I
That's
was just
public record.
saying that for that purpose only. Yep. So what do you think? Any other ideas? So if we take out,
so Mary, I mean, I would bring up again, the density, the ability of somebody to put in a certain number of solar panels that's extremely dense, that that a regulation that requires less dense will make it less financially feasible. If that's our goal, to discourage ground solar, right? Because the financials are all about having a lot of panels in a small cluster, right? And if you force them to spread out, you might change the financial picture there.
So through the chair, one concern with that is as solar technology evolves, panels may get smaller and more efficient. So limiting the number of, so kind of going off on a tangent on this one, some towns have regulated solar size based on like megawattage, and that has not aged well because the megawattage has gone up, but the size itself has gone down. So it really limits solar development that they may want. So it might have the same problem in the future of allowing a certain number of panels when the panels may be a lot smaller, half the size of what they are now. And then you're really limiting the size of the solar array to a negative way that the town wants rather than a positive way by doing it that way. So I think like looking at it as a lot rather than the panels themselves is probably more beneficial because that will age more gracefully than something else that might change with technology.
yeah, and to reiterate that in a different way, this is our goal is probably, I think I'm safe to say our goal is to reduce the sheer volume of the panels in town rather than anything else. It's more to just.
Well, I thought it was more to stop clear cutting and to stop the encroachment on some of the residential areas. That's why I'm confused at why we want to discourage industrial A, especially when there's huge parking lots now. And since
No, primary use, primary use.
oh no, but I'm getting back to that because they have these huge parking lots right now, and many of these buildings are not going to be used to the same capacity that they have been, because many people are working from home and working, doing other things. And so to maybe encourage, this is just another way of looking at it, to encourage them to put it in these wasted area, huge parking lots now might be a good thing.
It could be.
Because they're already there, everything's clear cut, and that might be a way of getting revenue out of these companies that are just no longer there. Maybe it makes the land more valuable if we try to encourage them to use the parking lots for something else, because there's no, they're not, 10,000 cars being parked up on South Street anymore.
No, I agree with you completely, but that would still be an accessory use because
Good
there's
point.
a building on the lot. And
Mhm.
so it really is allowed and it wouldn't be affected by this bylaw. So.
I think John had a good point at the beginning, though, is if it's our goal, my goal is to save trees and save woods and protect neighborhoods. I do think asking for panels to be less dense could potentially make that piece of land less appealing, but it doesn't necessarily save trees. You still got to chop. If someone says, okay, I can do it less dense, they're still chopping down all the trees. In fact, they might ask to chop down a little bit more than they would have otherwise. And they're still clear cutting right next to a neighborhood. I do think that the density, which I had never considered, the density of panels would be a discouragement. I don't think it goes to the heart of where this discussion started, which John Coutinho brought up for us a second ago, which is protect trees and protect neighborhoods.
I have a contribution to the chair, Deborah Feinberg. We are blessed in Hopkinton to have industrial districts and industrial places, and that's where commercial activity belongs. And I'd be interested to know a little bit about those who carved those spaces out, what their thinking was that would be, because we do have South Street, we do have industrial area B, and we do have industrial area C. And what's really nice is it provides an access to 495, and it provides areas for those kinds of investments to incur and to be encouraged. So I'm just wondering, if we already are blessed with industrial areas, how can we better encourage the use of them for those kinds of activities?
Gotta mute again. Ron, you gotta mute again. Thank you. Thanks, Deb.
So that's just my excitement and my appreciation of Hopkinton is learning how our forefathers or how those that came before us developed these areas, and it'd be great if we could somehow encourage the use of them that way.
Thank you.
So I, through the chair, if I may add, so we cannot outright ban solar development. That's not, we don't have the freedom to do it. So by the process of elimination, where do we not want it at the highest top priority? We don't want it in the residential areas. We don't want it where trees are there, where the forests are there. In that priority list, if you come to it, for me, industrial A is down the list. So unfortunately, if we can't find a better alternative, industrial areas become the only choices. That's why I don't have any points when you ask the question of how can we discourage in industrial A? I would rather, if industrial A can be encouraged, other zones can be kept free of this, is what I would go for, because it's already been clear cut. It's already been, it's not as densely covered in trees as residential areas.
However, I will tell you, Madam, we're talking about an area of industrial A that abuts Lake Maspinock, and it's fully wooded. It's all trees. And it is preserved land, except that it's privately owned.
Yes, so but if it's a zone for I'm only talking about the areas that have already been classified as industrial where
It is industrial. It is industrial
That's
zone.
what I'm saying. So if, okay, say we don't say you're not allowed to do solar, but a company can come and do the same thing if they are allowed to by right, it's because it's an industrial area. If we can stop them from clear cutting because of protections that we have based on other rules that we have, conservation and all that stuff, we have stopped them from clear cutting everything else. Why can't we do the same thing for solar and stop them from clear cutting the whole area? Because my problem is if we take industrial A off the chart, what other alternative do we have? What other zone is there that we can consider? Because I keep looking, anywhere we go, we have lovely forest, and right now we don't have the option of saying no solar right now, because that state is not going to allow saying no solar development ever. So we have to it's almost like we are sacrificing one zone to protect the other zones.
Mhm. That is true. So I would say that our ultimate desire is to encourage solar on rooftops and to discourage solar that is ground mounted. I think that's that's what I personally prefer. I think that rooftop mounted solar is less visible in almost all cases, and less obtrusive on and of course, being on a building or on a parking lot, you're not disturbing the trees because they've already been disturbed for the parking lot or the building. So in general, I think that we are, again, this solar bylaw only deals with the ground mounted commercial.
Right.
I think we all agree that it's best that it's not in residential areas, but state law says it can be in any zones. So we don't have that option of saying only in business zones, only in industrial. But we do have some other options. So let's look at the other options.
Mary?
Yes.
My sense was also our discussion there on South Street Industrial was more a thought experiment than a policy prescription anyway.
Yes.
Right.
My sense, we were just saying, let's pretend we want to protect this zone. How could we do it besides? So I don't want to get too in the weeds and saying we are picking out plots that will or will not be zoned for solar. I think
Right.
the thought
And I agree. Because we may come out of this with no changes to the zoning map, only changes to the wording of the zoning bylaw. If we can justify the changes to the zoning bylaw. So that's the key. So based on the discussion thus far, which I'm going to wrap up for tonight, my personal take is that changing the minimum from 3, where it is currently, to 5 or 7 or 10 doesn't have a huge effect on where in town solar could be placed, because most of the lots are in the red already, and that's 10 and above. Okay. And I think placing a maximum could have some strange unintended consequences. So I'm not sure that doing that is a good option at this point. I don't think we should take it off the table completely, but I do like the concept of maximum development on each parcel. So 60% or whatever. So 60% was pulled out because that is a current, as somewhere in our current bylaws, 60% developed.
Or it could be less. I mean, if you're in lakefront, it's 25%. If you're in industrial, it's 40%. I mean, 60% is the largest we actually have for lot coverage, believe it or not.
But I like that concept.
Yes.
And I think that we need to look at some recent solar developments what the total acreage of the lots were, what the total acreage of the actual solar panels and fencing and so on, the accoutrements, to understand that. Also, things to consider while you're thinking about this for the next 2 weeks is should it be I'm just using 60% as an example, but 60% of the total lot or 60% of the developable lot. So wetlands taken out already, that sort of thing. So reducing it to the viable land and then say 60% of that. So this is just some thoughts on different ways we might want to think about these restrictions. And we definitely need to give some thought to the reasoning behind it, to the justification. So even if it's, just Googling some benefits of nature and trees and things like that, that is the kind of thing that we need to have to justify any changes.
So, Madam Chair, I did some quick calculations if you'd like me to share for three developments, recent developments. So TGA Solar was 34 acres. The solar portion of it was about 7.28 acres, which was a coverage of 21% of the lot.
Okay.
Franklin Development was 69 total acres. The solar is on 23.5 acres, so that's 34% of the lot. And the Mechanic Street is 99 total acres, 14 of which are solar, which is 14% of the lot.
Okay, good.
Wow, that's not going to do it.
Yep.
Ron, you're back on again.
But I would like to suggest that those three developments are very well screened and did take into account all the lessons learned from Alexander Road. But they are large developments. It's true. Okay. Exit full screen. All right, here we go. Okay, it is 9 o'clock, so I would like to do some administrative items and then close for the night. One thing is we need to make sure we have on our calendars the next few meetings. And November 23rd is Thanksgiving week, but it's the Monday night would be our next meeting if enough of us can make it. Yep.
Not traveling anymore.
Yeah, no kidding. I'll be here.
Exactly.
Everybody else okay
Yes.
with that? Okay.
I'm here.
November 23rd. All right. And then the next meeting after that would be December 7th. That good with everyone? Doesn't conflict with anything in the town?
That's the planning board meeting.
It is? I don't
Sure.
have that as the planning board meeting. Okay, so is there a meeting on November 30th?
There is.
There's a meeting on November 30th and December 7th.
So December 7th is a regular meeting. November 30th is the administrative plan for the next year type of meeting. That was added in.
I didn't know that they took over 2 weeks in a row. How dare they? So the 14th is clear?
14th is clear.
Okay, how's the 14th for everybody?
Sounds good. We lead boring lives now.
And then I show the 21st as a planning board meeting. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay. And yeah, why don't we wait until the 14th to see whether or not people are available and willing to meet on the 28th. We'll also see how much progress we make in 2 more meetings, okay?
Yes.
And John, if you could just send me those statistics that you'd pulled up on the most recent.
Was the statistics taking out the wetlands percentage? Like you wouldn't know that off the cuff. So that's a different calculation.
No, the percentages were just the lot size as
Yeah.
it's in the decision, and
Yeah.
then the leased area. It doesn't have the wetlands. It doesn't have anything else.
Yeah. So
Right. But I should be able to pull up those maps and see if there's the wetlands were calculated in there too, so. From the planning board meetings. All right. Okay. Minutes. Have people reviewed the minutes? Are there any comments? No comments?
Nope.
Okay. I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. Roll call vote. Mary Larson Marlowe, yes. Ria?
Rhea McNamara, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar Sivaraman, yes.
John?
John Catino, yes.
Ron?
Ron Foisey, yes.
Madhu?
Madhumita Chandrasekhar, yes.
Curtis?
Curtis Smithson, yes.
Ted?
Ted Barker Hook will abstain. He wasn't at the meeting.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, that's true. You were mentioned a lot. No, you weren't mentioned, but you were.
Watch the video. Okay, thank you. So minutes are approved, and now I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Competition for that.
And a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, who moved?
I'm sorry, say again?
Who moved?
We'll give that one to Sundar.
And I second.
Okay, Mary Larson Marlowe, yes. Ria?
Rhea, yes.
Sundar?
Sundar, yes.
John?
John, yes.
Ron?
Ron, yes.
Madhu?
Madhu, yes.
Curtis?
Curtis, yes.
Ted?
Ted, yes.
Rachel, we'll get you next time. You'll be voting.
Thank you, everyone. This is going to be a tough one to get through, but really, this really went well. John, thanks so much for getting all those slides. They really helped.
Oh,
And-
yeah, those maps are wonderful.
Yeah, they really, really helped. Hey, everyone, have a great week. Be safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Guys.
But